Today we're going to work on adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. And we're going to use the numbers, or the fractions, 2/3 and 3/4. The first thing that you need to do is write your fractions vertically. This will help when you're drawing out your work and demonstrating what is actually happening. Now, the first thing that you need to do when adding with unlike denominators is find your LCD, or your least common denominator. This is also the least common multiple. And you can find that by listing the multiples of each of your denominators, which in this case are 3 and 4. Now, I'm just going to make a short list underneath here to show me listing my multiples so that I can find the least common one among these two numbers, 3 and 4. So I'm just going to start with 3. Actually, I'm going to type it so that it's nice and neat. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. And multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. Now here you can see that there are definitely a few common multiples, but the one that is the smallest among the two lists is 12. So this is going to be what we use as our common denominator between 2/3 and 3/4. And I'm just going to make some workspace here. And again, I'm working with 12ths, so I'm going to make that my end goal with 2/3, along with my end goal of 3/4. Now, what I want to be thinking in my head is, how can I go from 3 to 12? What form of 1 can I multiply 2/3 by to get to 12ths? Because of the identity property, I can multiply a fraction by 1 and get the same fraction, or the same value of a fraction. So I'm multiplying by a form of 1, and in this case it's going to be 4/4, because 3 times 4 is 12. And I do the same thing to the top that I did to the bottom, multiplying by that same form of 1. And 2 times 4 is 8. And now with 3/4, I'm trying the same thing. I want to be thinking about what form of 1 I need to multiply by to get an equivalent fraction of 3/4 with 12ths as my denominator. And in this case, that's going to be 3/3, because 4 times 3 is 12. And I want to be thinking now, 3 times 3 is 9. And now what I'm going to do is I have my new equivalent fractions, 8/12 and 9/12. And I'm just going to add them. And 8 plus 9 is 17. So I'm going to have 17/12. Now this is actually an improper fraction, and the whole that I can see in this fraction is 12/12. So I have 1, and then I have 5 left over, and 12 stays my denominator. So my final answer when I add 2/3 and 3/4 is 1 and 5/12. Okay. Now, what we are going to do is we're going to do subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. And in this case, we are going to do 4/5 minus 1/3. And just like we did in adding, we're actually going to line them up vertically so that we have some workspace. And again, similar to the addition, what we're going to do is start to find our LCD, or our least common denominator, of 5 and 3, because those are our two denominators here, 5 and 3. So I'm actually just going to start listing the multiples of each of these denominators so that I have an ongoing list. Multiples of 5 are 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and let's try 3. Multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. And looking at my lists now, I can see that there are common factors, especially if I kept going, I would find even more common factors between, or common multiples between 5 and 3. I'm sorry, we're definitely working with multiples here. And the smallest common multiple I see on this list is 15 between my 5 and 3. So that's what I'm going to make my common denominator. And again, I'm going to draw some space to work. Now, just like with adding, I want to be thinking about what form of 1 can I multiply my 4/5 by to turn it into 15ths. I want an equivalent fraction. And like we talked about before, the identity property lets me find an equivalent fraction using a form of 1. So I'm actually going to multiply 5 by 3/3, because 5 times 3 is 15. And I'm going to do the same thing to the top. So I'm multiplying by this form of 1, 3/3, and I'm going to get 12/15, because 4 times 3 is 12. And I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom. What form of 1 can I multiply 3 by to get to 15ths? And in this case, it's 5/5. And again, I'm just going to multiply across. 3 times 5 is 15, and 1 times 5 is 5. And now I can just subtract. I'm working with my new equivalent fractions are 12/15 minus 5/15. And I'm able to subtract now because they are equivalent fractions. They both have the same denominator. They're equivalent to these forms on the left, but now they have the same denominator, so we're able to actually subtract. And 12 minus 5 is 7, and my denominator stays the same at 15. So my final answer is 7/15. And I can't simplify that anymore. They don't have any other common factors that I can make this fraction smaller or put it in simplest form. It's actually not getting smaller, it's just going into a simpler form, and 7/15 is then my final answer.